All right, everyone, we are ready to move ahead with our first Gardening of the Panhandle Live of the year 2024, right here in February. We have a great season for you, but today is going to be all about spring gardening vegetables. I am Beth Bowles over here in Escambia County, your moderator today. Happy to be with you, and we have a more Eastern panel today. So we'll meet everyone in just a minute. Behind the scenes, we have our Zoom chat with Josh. He's going to handle that and your questions and put all the publications over in the chat. And behind the scenes, our technical expert is Julie McConnell. She has a new position with us. She is our RSA, our Regional Specialized Agent in Horticulture, now in Washington County. We're thrilled to have her in that position. But meeting everyone on the East, Mark, you want to introduce yourself and get us started?
Hi there, everyone. I'm Mark Tanzig. I'm the horticulture agent in Leon County, so Tallahassee.
All right, Molly, you're right there near Mark.
And I'm right near Mark, just in a different room, but also in Leon County and the Sustainable Agriculture and Community Food Systems agent.
How neat. We're happy to have you. And DeAnthony, a little bit east of Tallahassee. Tell us where you are.
Yes, my name is D'Anthony Price. I am in Jefferson County, the Keystone County, and we're only about 30 minutes east of Tallahassee. So we are getting more towards east. But and I'm the Agricultural and Natural Resource Extension Agent. Excuse me.
Yeah, you are going to meet our experts from the East today. So happy to have all of you with us. We have a lot of questions today. We are going to do our very best to get through them all. If by some reason we miss a question that you've asked, don't worry. We will get that answered in a newsletter format, and this will be recorded and shown on our YouTube page. All right, DeAnthony, we're going to get you started first. Of course, everyone wants to know, what are the best vegetables to grow here? And then when do they start these seeds of these best vegetables to grow?
Yes, Beth. Very good question. So I get that question a lot is what some of the vegetables that grow here. And one of the first things that we need to think about is our zone. So recently we are 9A. And so with that being said, we need to make sure that the types of vegetables that we grow are a best variety for this region. Here in North Florida, we get really hot still. So just making sure that those crops that we are looking at are warm season crops. So what are some seeds that we should be starting now? So we should be looking at our nightshades right now. So more of our tomatoes, our eggplants, our peppers. UFIFAS has a really good North Florida gardening calendar that tells you exactly what types of vegetables grow best here through each month, and then also which vegetables need to be seeded, which vegetables need to be transplanted, and which vegetables need to be transplanted with care. So that is a really good resource to use when you are I'm thinking about exactly what needs to be grown here and what needs to be started by seeds.
Well, DeAnthony, of some of these vegetables, if you're a novice gardener, which I'm sure we have some new gardeners to the area, what are a few of the easiest things for them to get started with so they won't be frustrated?
Yeah, so first, when we talk about easy vegetables, we are really referring to vegetables that require low maintenance and low attention. So some of the crops that you can plant now that fit into that category is one is radishes, excuse me. Those still can be planted right now, but if you are wanting them, I would do that very soon. And they are also a very short crop. They only take about 30 days. Another very low maintenance crop would be some of your peppers. Tomatoes are also pretty easy as long as we are pruning them and making sure that they are structured properly. So yeah.
Yeah, I think if I'm gonna grow a tomato, I'm a low maintenance gardener. It's got to be maybe a cherry for sure.
Yes, yes, most definitely.
All right, Mark. So we've kind of picked a few, and we have that vegetable gardening guide to look through. If you're getting started with seeds and how to propagate these, how do you know what seeds are really suitable for our panhandle? There's all these sources online and so on. So how do we get seeds for here, and how do we really start them?
Okay, so I would start with the Florida Vegetable Gardening Guide. So I believe that Josh has it linked in our chat. So yeah, as we're speaking, if you open your chat feature in Zoom, Joshua Chris is putting up these links as we go along, and he's put in there the vegetable gardening guide. And the great thing about that vegetable gardening guide, in the back, there's some good charts on timing.
Mhm.
And then there's also some charts that show you the best varieties that are known to do well in Florida. So I would just start there, especially if you're just getting started, because those are the reliable, right? That we know that they're going to do well. Those catalogs, I actually have one over here somewhere. I think someone dropped off the Johnny's catalog or something for me recently, and it's got all kinds of beautiful stuff in there, right? The Baker Creek catalog, if you guys see that one, it's gorgeous, right? But some of those varieties may not be well suited to our area. So I would stick with the classics in the vegetable gardening guide that IFAS puts out. And if you want to experiment with some of those, just know that, they may not do as well. But, if you want to experiment, go ahead. As far as best to get them propagated, if you're starting from seeds for the first time, Molly and I often, well, I hear Molly talk often about, you want to plant it no more than about, 2 to 3 times the diameter of the seed. So you don't want to plant your seeds too deep. You don't want to be too shallow, like Goldilocks, it's got to be just right. So usually that's about 2 to 3 times the diameter, and keep them well watered. And once they sprout, you start backing off the water a little bit as they get roots settled, but at the beginning, it's really important to keep that soil nice and moist so those seeds sprout. From transplant, if you're a little bit hesitant about starting from seed, just go ahead. It's okay to cheat. Just go buy some transplants and, follow the right timing that's in that vegetable gardening guide as far as when to get them in the ground.
And good light, right? For these seeds,
Oh,
good
yeah,
seedlings.
gotta have light. Yeah. All the veggies, they want good sunshine.
All right, Molly, if we're starting these seeds, let's say we're starting a tomato and we're starting a squash. We can't put these outdoors yet. So if we're starting them indoors, how many weeks ahead of transplant do we start these seeds?
Yeah, so for tomatoes, they really don't do well in the extreme heat that we start to get in June and July. And so you can get good production if you start them early. But of course, we have cold weather from January, February, even into March. And so if you want to have good tomato production starting from seed, I would get them in the ground about 6 to 8 weeks before our last frost. So that's going to put you at about January, February. Really, January, maybe mid is ideal for tomatoes. But of course, as you guys talked about, you need good sunlight. So starting them, you're going to have a greenhouse for protection from the cold. And then you will want to have good lighting if you don't have a greenhouse. So you'd have to use some grow lights if you want to start from seed. But yeah, January, February is the time to get them started if it's a tomato. Something like squash, on the other hand, you would want to wait a little bit longer. I'd say mid-February, even into March, if you're starting indoors. Squash can take the heat better than tomatoes, so you can even wait until kind of our last frost date is starting to pass. And you could seed those directly as well, but seeding them in containers is going to give you better consistency and gives you the ability to choose the strongest seedlings to go exactly where you want them in the ground.
Wonderful. So we're getting ready you should be starting a few things right now if you want to start indoors. Terrific. All right, Mark, we've kind of gotten seeds started. We know a few things we want to grow. What about preparing the ground? Let's say someone is going to plant in the ground. Do they need to till, or do we not till anymore? There's a lot of information out there about you need to turn the soil, but then others says you don't. So which would we do?
Well, gardeners are pretty stubborn and they got their own ways of doing things, but we'll tell you, kind of the recommended and some common practices and what the difference is between those things. So, first off, with your site, make sure you get plenty of sunshine, right? So, you reminded me earlier there, Beth. Your garden, you want to make sure you get at least 8, maybe 7, sure, but 8 hours of full sun is great. Molly and I typically tell folks to go out to your site and do the Y of the YMCA. And when you look up, there should be no obstructions in between your hands. That's a good little rule of thumb. But once you have the site picked out and you're going to grow in the ground, right, there's this idea of do we till or not till? And you may have heard of regenerative agriculture out there, or no-till gardening, or conservation tillage is another word for it. But what we know now is that, tilling the soil can help break down organic matter very quickly. Organic matter is something you actually want in your soil, so that's not great for, that's not a good thing necessarily. And when you till, it also brings up a lot of weed seeds, right? So you're actually, maybe bringing up more seeds of weeds that were buried, too far down to sprout. So you still need to kind of cultivate the ground and get it ready for planting, right? So one option, right, because you really want to minimize tilling for the reasons we've mentioned there. And what you can do is you can do strips, right? So instead of, you have a 50 by 50 plot, instead of tilling that whole 50 by 50 area, maybe you till just where you're going to plant to get whatever vegetative cover there out of the way. And then you focus all your amendments and your planting in those strips that you've tilled. And that can be a way to kind of minimize just broad tilling, the erosion that comes with that, the breakdown of organic matter. And that can be kind of a balance, right? And if you want to practice no-till, you can, but you got to go a little extra step sometimes of, broad forking or hand digging out the turf that might be there. So I did put a link, I referenced a link all about organic matter and the importance of organic matter and the ability for it to hold onto nutrients and water. And so that really gets into this idea of what we call conservation tillage, of really minimizing how much you till.
Sounds good, Mark. So we've got our soil prepared a good ways. Now, Molly, is the soil pH important? Do we have a good pH for most vegetable gardens already? And, should we test before we amend, or amend and test? What should we do with that?
Yeah, so you probably want to get a soil test, especially if you haven't had one in the last year or so. And this can be a real foolproof way to figure out if you have a pH that's going to be good for vegetables, and that's going to be slightly acidic. So the pH scale goes up to 14, 7 being neutral. And so we're kind of looking in the zone of maybe 6.5, kind of ideally for most vegetables. And so by getting a soil test, testing your pH, you can kind of see where you are. Depending on the native soil in your area, you might be slightly alkaline, you might be more acidic than you would want. So it's real important to get a soil test to see your baseline. And you're really aiming for about between 6 and 7 for pH for vegetables.
Okay, sounds good. So it's a good time to do that right now, right?
Yes, definitely. You can get your testing form, your testing bag from your local, not Leon County, whatever county you're in, but you can get it from your extension office, and then you'll send your soil down to Gainesville, and whatever county you're in, if you put the county name on the form, that extension agent is going to get a copy of your soil test. So if you have any questions, you can call them up and they can give you some answers.
And just so you know, we do have a new soil kit too. So there's multiple, or a couple of ways to soil test through the University of Florida with that backing. Mark, if someone had clay soil though, they had, compacted, you have all these new homes, the soil is not great. What do they do for that? What are their options for gardening?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would recommend, and if you have really tight clays or the compacted soils, really the raised beds are going to be a good way to go. And so with raised beds, people were really into them lately because they look nice and neat and they're nice and square. But one of the main benefits to raised beds is, dealing with, not very suitable soils that, your native soils, right? So you lift them up, you make a raised bed, and you're going to get good drainage and you're going to get loose, soil that you're going to put in those beds. So you kind of get away from those problems with the clay or any other compaction issues. Now you may still want to try, if you still want to work on that clay, your native soil, I'd recommend trying to break it up or aerate it any way you kind of can and get some organic matter on top of there. Some maybe compost or a topsoil compost mix to kind of slowly um, loosen that soil up over time. And we linked a Maryland extension document in here. It was really great. I liked how they kind of went through, why raised beds would work for these various situations. And it was like, scenario one, scenario two, and you kind of like step you through, what to consider in those different scenarios. So check that out. But yeah, hard clay, probably raised beds, best way to go.
You mentioned also the aesthetics of that raised bed. Someone had asked a question about an HOA and requirements. That would be the way around it, by having a very attractive raised bed instead of a big garden in the ground, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as long as you got to check with that HOA, board, of course, first. But sure, yeah, that you could probably get away with really nice looking beds, perhaps in the front yard of an HOA.
Perhaps not all neighborhoods
Yeah, it depends.
approving of that. Now, you did mention the big why. So now all these
Yes.
people are going to go out and we're going to have a lot of calls over why everyone is
Yeah.
in a
I mean,
why.
we tell folks you can go ahead and do the whole YMCA if you want to, but you really only have to do the Y when you're out looking for the right site.
Yeah, so you did mention about that with light and how important light is. Is it the same for a container? It
Ye-
needs the same amount of light, right?
Yes, yeah, that's plants need that sunlight to do photosynthesis. And if you're a plant trying to put on a big tasty tomato or cucumber or squash, you're gonna need a lot of energy from the sun to do that. So you want those plants in as much light as you can get them, whether in the ground or a container.
Okay, terrific. Well, we're gonna get to you in a minute, D'Anthony, don't worry. Molly, in a small garden, what plants really complement each other in that type area? Because not everyone has room for a big garden. How can we make the most of that space in a small container or small garden area?
Yeah, I mean, in my backyard, I just have 2 raised beds and then some containers for gardening. And I really try to think of my garden, first of all, into like a square feet. And so instead of static rows, like say a farmer would use, you can think of it's like 8x4 raised bed. That's 32 square feet to work with. Then depending on the vegetable, a certain amount will fit into each square. So really think about all the different aspects of your garden. Also use trellises. So you can use the cages or trellises for your tomatoes and your vining crops like your peas and your beans. And so you can get those going upward off the ground, and that's going to open up some more space below. And that's where you can plant like your zucchinis, your squashes. Their big leaves can also help to moderate the soil temperature and decrease any weed pressure. So kind of creating a different little micro spaces within your garden and using how the plants grow to your advantage, and having plenty of trellises on the edges of your raised bed is going to help you to really utilize that space.
Terrific. Well, D'Anthony, this is my first raised bed. So what vegetables would be the easiest to start? Give me a start for the year.
Yeah, Beth. So, growing in raised beds, most of your common vegetables will do great, in raised beds. It just really depend on the size of your raised bed. So, if we are working with more of a smaller space, then I would most definitely recommend a lot of our vegetables that grow upwards. So, and so a lot of our herbs, tomatoes, cucumbers, things of that nature. But if we are working with a raised bed that is bigger, that is more wider, then we can start, I'm thinking about our squashes and our zucchinis and things of that nature. I have even grown pumpkins in raised beds. And they did grow out very wide, but they did great. Another vegetable that you can actually plant within the next week or two that grows great in raised beds are potatoes. Let's just make sure that if we have a raised bed that has a bottom to it, that it's at least about 4 to 5 inches deep, just so those root crops have enough space to really grow out. So yeah.
Okay, we've gotten a good start there. Well, Mark, the big thing about raised beds, the most expensive part is soil.
Mm.
What are some ways to save money, and what really type of soil should we put in this raised bed?
It's a good question, and it is usually the most expensive part. So I do want to remind folks that you don't have to use a raised bed, right? If you have good soil at your, in your backyard, then go ahead and just, like Molly said, get a soil test, make it amend it just right. So you don't have to. We've had actually people ask, at events where we have a raised bed, like, can I only grow vegetables in a raised bed? And it's like, no, there's, our soil is usually pretty good around here. So don't forget you can use your native soil. But if you are going to then be filling this raised bed, as far as like a cheap way around it, there usually isn't a very good cheap way around it unless you're making your own compost or I mean, maybe sometimes the local county or city municipality is, giving away compost or something like that. But here, for instance, our county gives away a fine mulch that looks like compost, but a lot of people have tried, and it's free, right? So it's a great resource. But people have tried to grow their vegetables in a mix of that with some compost or soil, and it doesn't tend to do well because there's no nutrients in that stuff. So what you're looking for a raised bed is typically a mix, maybe 50-50 of composted product with topsoil. And so the link that we just put up in here is from Rutgers, another good extension university out of New Jersey. And they, again, had a really great soil for raised beds document that they put together that really got into maybe a little bit more than you want to know. But, basically you're looking at about a 50-50 topsoil compost mix. And so to get that, just call around to your bulk landscape supply places and around you and ask them what they have. And so we have a couple here in Tallahassee that, there's already they have like a garden mix that comes with that topsoil, some composted bark, composted manure, and they offer that at a pretty reasonable price. It's usually cheaper, so looking to cut costs, buying it by the yard is going to be a lot cheaper than buying it in bagged, at the local hardware store. You're just going to have to either have a pickup truck or pay for delivery to make it, happen.
And free is not always better. So just remember,
Right.
always look at your product first if you can. Really important. We do have some people, in order to improve their soil, let's say we're transitioning in that phase, they asked if a cover crop is needed. And if so, what do they do with that cover crop before they're ready to plant? Do they leave it there? Do they have to till it under? What do they do with that, Mark?
Well, yeah, I would say what is the purpose that they want to grow the cover crop? If it's because I think the question asked, cover crops or cardboard, what should I do? That was one of the questions. And so if you're just looking for weed control over the summer or over a time where you're not going to be growing, then cardboard would work fine to just kind of push those down, or even kind of like solarizing we've mentioned before in some of our Gardening the Panhandle lives, where you just kind of cover it with a plastic and bury it in. That will help with weeds. If you're trying to improve your soil health and nutrient status of the soil, and at the same time maybe keep weeds down, that's where you could put in a cover crop. You want to get the right crops for the time that we're in, right? So there's warm season cover crops, cool season cover crops, and then managing that cover crop, to prepare it for the plants you're going to be putting in there for your garden. You do have to kind of manage that kind of just right. One of our newer agents, Abby, over in Jackson County, she actually put together a really great cover crop article in our Gardening the Panhandle newsletter. And that's just put in the chat. You can go check that out. And she gets into the kind of the crops you can use and also how to manage it. And so often what they use is something called chop and drop, where you kind of, hack it down, you mow it down, somehow you chop the stuff and you knock it down for a while. And you do have to give plenty of time for that to kind of break down a little bit before you follow it up with your main crop. And those cover crops can be really helpful as it decays, right? That lets those nutrients back into the soil. It loosens the soil as they're growing. So there's lots of good benefits to cover crops. But just know you do have to do a little bit of time. The timing's got to be right, and the management at the end you want to get right. So check out Abby's article there. She talks about it.
Yeah, she wrote a terrific article for us.
With some
We're
good
going to
pictures
move
too from
into.
Daniel Leonard.
I'm sorry.
With some good pictures of what it actually looks like after you chop and drop and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, Daniel supplied those pictures from his own garden, I believe.
Yeah.
So we're going to move into one of our most requested vegetables with information is tomatoes. And Molly, we'll start with you. We've kind of mentioned this a little bit, but let's remind everyone, when is the best time to start tomatoes? And can you start seeds outdoors?
I think the best time to start tomatoes if you're growing from seed is going to be January or in February. Starting outdoors, you know, the tomatoes really can't take cold weather. They are frost sensitive. And so anything below 40 degrees, they're going to struggle. When we get close to freezing, you might lose your entire crop. So you know, that's why it's important to have them protected. But on the other side of that coin, you know, if you wait to seed your tomatoes going into mid-March, late March, early April, you know, think about how long it's going to take for that tomato to mature. And once we get into the temperatures are not below 75 degrees and we're getting into 95, 100 during the day, it actually will inhibit flower production. And so you might have a tomato that looks like it's growing well vegetatively, but it starts to really slow down on its flower and fruit production. And that really does start to happen as we get into those real hot days of summer. And then not to mention all of the pest and stink bugs, caterpillars, that pressure gets really high going into the deep depths of summer. And so that's kind of why it's important if you're growing from seed to start them early. And if you've waited until March and April to start from seed, I would go ahead and just buy some transplants. And that'll give you that head start that you needed to have a good production.
So no really direct seeding for tomatoes, maybe some other crops, but not tomatoes.
Correct. I would not recommend direct seeding tomatoes where we live.
All right, you mentioned some heat. So this brings up another question we had that we'll move over to D'Anthony. What about the heat time? Are there some tomatoes that can tolerate a little more heat than others? And how do we extend the life of that tomato as we warm into even May and June?
Yeah, Beth. So, so when we are, I'm talking about, and maximize tomato production, during, increase temperatures. One of the first things that we can do is making sure that the variety that we choose has a high heat tolerance. And so I would most definitely, recommend, our growers to do some research and find some varieties that do best when we have a increase in temperature. Some other methods that we can do is number one, shading. So just like what Molly said, so once we reach over about 90 degrees, the plant really needs shade in order to develop fruit. And so you can provide shade by using some shade covers, using a high tunnel, or even if your tomatoes are planted in a container, you can just move them to more of a shaded area. Another thing that we can do, especially for the tomatoes that are in ground, is mulching. So one of the things that happens when we have really high temperatures is that the soil tends to dry out. And so one of the methods that we can do to really help that is applying about a 2 or 3 inch layer of mulch to really help our soil and moisture to really keep in that moisture. And since we are talking about moisture, another thing that you can do is watering. So when we also get into those high temperatures, plants turn into more of a survival mode. So making sure that the soil stays moist is really highly important. And then another thing that we can also do is pick our fruit early when it is pretty hot. High temperatures do affect the ripening. And so we can most definitely pick fruit already that shows a hint of ripe coloring, and then we can finish that ripening inside.
Well, terrific. So, and there's a great publication we found from our friends at Mississippi State that have a list of tomatoes that will give you some of the heat tolerant selections. So that will be in the chat and also in our newsletter for later, so you can check that one out. Well, we know sometimes tomatoes have issues in the ground. We do have some diseases here. So Molly, what are some of the keys to growing a tomato in a container?
So yeah, because we do have a hot, humid climate, one of the things you can do is really good pruning and good air circulation. So as that tomato grows, prune off all of the lower stems and all the lower suckers so that you have some airflow that can get underneath the canopy. Also have good spacing. So you don't want to plant your tomatoes too close together because you won't have that airflow, and that could lead to different diseases in your soil. So be sure to have them at least 18 inches apart between each tomato, and then using something like a trellis or a cage, you can have them going upward so you don't get any rot on the ground. A few other things you can keep in mind. Tomatoes can succumb to like cutworms easily. So when they're really young, so when the stems are smaller than the size of a pencil, you can use what we call a cutworm collar, which can be really anything that if I use even a 12-pack cardboard, I cut it up and then I'll just put that around my tomato, and these cutworms come along and they kind of run into that collar, and then they prevents them from eating right through your stem. If anybody's had cutworm damage, you come outside, it looks like somebody just came with scissors and cut down your plant. So that can be a good thing to help them, as they get established in the ground, and then just really helping to keep that airflow going.
Wonderful. Well, Mark, this one came in on our chat, and someone asked, with a tomato, can we plant it in the same spot in the raised bed or the container every year? Do we need to rotate? Oh, you're on mute, Mark.
Yeah. Yes, I would definitely rotate. So our nightshades, D'Anthony mentioned the nightshades, right? So peppers, tomatoes, eggplant, those are all in the same family, the nightshade family, and they're really susceptible. Nematodes really like that family. And if you plant those plants over and over in the same location, you're very likely to get a nematode problem and other problems as well. So bacterial wilt was mentioned, somewhere in one of these questions as well. Bacterial wilt is a common disease of tomatoes as well, especially if they're staying in the same place. So always rotate your crops, because once you get nematode problems, it's kind of hard to drive them away. So rotate crops, rotate, rotate, rotate.
Great. Terrific. Mark, we're going to stick with you. So we're growing these tomatoes. What's a good fertilizer plan, especially if someone's interested in our organic type fertilizer?
So the tomatoes are, they're kind of nutrient hogs. They like to eat a lot and they like to feed. So they're heavy feeders. You of course don't want to over fertilize, right? So if you have good soil with good compost mix, typically you're going to have a pretty good amount of fertilization there, and nutrition in the soil. But you may still want to provide them a little boost. And if you're going with organic practices, I mean, there's kind of commercially available products at your lawn and garden center that are, they're like the Espoma brand, for instance, is a big brand, a lot of organic options there. It's usually going to be lots of manures and feather meals and blood meals and things like that. And you actually buy those kind of independently as well, kind of separately. But if you're looking to be, I think we have a link in here about correcting 3 common tomato growing mistakes that gets in a little bit of fertilization. And if you're looking for organic products, so with one thing you're going to want to look for is this OMRI label on the product. And so OMRI is the Organic Material Review Institute, I believe, Molly, right? Is that right? And they are the entity in charge of certifying what products are, organic or not. And they have a really great website that just has all their products, right? So fertilizers, various pesticides. And so I would go there and look. There's lots of information there, and there's plenty of options now too for, either small little 2-pound bags of organic fertilizer or up to, 50-pound bags of fertilizer as well. So there's lots of options available.
Oh, good. So we can both use inorganic or organic. It just depends what you would like.
Just depends what you like. And again, if you're not a certified organic farmer, there's no rules that say you have to stick to one or the other. So sometimes you may want to, organic products are going to usually be a little slower to react. And so if you think those tomatoes are really in need of a quick dose of something, you might want to go with a more like an inorganic or synthetic fertilizer product to give them that quick boost.
That's terrific. Good news for us. We're going to move into a few other things we've had questions about. There are other things besides tomatoes. Don't worry. D'Anthony, someone from the Grand Rising Community Garden. Whose county is that in? We know? They've asked about some easy herbs for a raised bed. So what would you recommend? Easy herbs.
Easy herbs. So I would most definitely recommend our herbs that are perennials. So meaning they grow back. And so some examples with that would be rosemary, oregano, mint, thyme. Another herb that is a annual that is also a pretty good herb and it is very common is everybody grows basil. And so basil and also parsley is also a pretty good herb. But a lot of your herbs will be very good in a raised bed.
Yeah, we all have to be careful about that mint though, right?
Yes.
That'll be your whole bed before the end of the
Yes.
season.
Yes, mints are good, but mints grow like fire. And so I highly recommend that if you are growing mint to make sure that we control it.
Yeah,
It gets its own raised bed.
Yes, it
it
does.
does.
Or plant it in a container.
Mhm.
Yeah, definitely. That's what we do with ours. Molly, you want to take one on carrots? We had a question about someone had tried carrots last year and they had no luck. So what is the best technique to get carrots to grow well?
Mm.
Yeah, so carrots do like a little bit cooler soil temperature. So, you want to, if you're going to plant spring carrots, I'd do it pretty soon. So they like it between 50, 75 degrees soil temperature. So that maybe could have been an issue if they started them too late. Another thing, you want really good seed to soil contact. So carrot seeds are super small. So when you're getting your seed bed prepared, getting out any of those big chunks of things and trying to make sure you have a fine soil medium where you're going to plant the carrots is really important. Carrots can't be easily transplanted, so it is going to be a crop that you're going to want to directly seed into the garden, and that's where it'll grow until you pick it. Steady watering. So if you, once you've planted your carrots, you want to give them a gentle but frequent water source so that the water is going to really help that germination process. And then patience. So carrots do take a long time to germinate. You might even take 2 weeks, upwards of even 3 weeks so make sure that you have them well marked and keep them well watered. And just try to really concentrate on the correct timing can help you.
Yeah, our weather is always, for a new gardener, our weather's always different. And you have to watch that to know sometimes when to plant. Sometimes you could get by with September. Sometimes you wait till October for carrots. You never know. Let's move a little bit into pests. We do have a lot of pests that can hit the garden. So Molly, how do we survive all these insects that are going to invade our raised beds or our in-ground garden?
Well, you can kind of think of it, we call it integrated pest management, kind of integrated approach. So first of all, consider all the kind of what we call cultural control methods. So, you want to have good timing, proper planting, good sanitation. So clean up any of your, weedy stuff where different kind of pests could be hanging out. And consider also biological control. So maybe have something like a trap crop that you can lure a certain insect over to a certain one that they're going to like better. For instance, leaf-footed bugs love sunflowers. So if you grow sunflowers ahead of, say, your tomatoes, then they're going to be going on over to your sunflowers where you can catch them, drop them in soapy water, help keep them away from your tomatoes. Also, scouting. So it's kind of a physical control strategy, but really getting out there and going to your garden every day, lifting up the leaves, looking for any signs of any insects. And if you see them, pick them right off, put them in soapy water. And on a small scale, you'd be surprised, that can really make a big difference on a lot of these different kind of insects that might be in your vegetable garden. And then kind of as a last resort, if you're just having a really, really tough time and you're having bad pest pressure, you can use some sort of, least toxic type of chemical control. That's going to be specific to whatever the issue is. But things like BT, which is Bacillus thuringiensis, it's a bacterium insecticide, can be something that can take care of caterpillars. So kind of think of it as an integrated approach, trying to do the best you can from the start to the finish.
Yeah, every day go out there, just look around. That's really important. You catch things early. Mark, what about a home that has deer issues? All this development, animals, nuisance wildlife's coming more into our yard. Do we live with it, or can we do something about those deer?
Deer are troublesome. So your best bet that's not even foolproof is like a 10-foot fence surrounding your garden. And maybe with an offset 8-foot fence just off of that, right? That's so it gets you a little bit better protection. We did put in a link here to, ways to deal with nuisance wildlife. So in the, in kind of not just a big 10-foot fence, but, electric fencing can help. And often it's recommended with deer. If you run a small electric fence around the garden and you kind of bait them with some peanut butter on chunks of little foil draped over the, the live wire, they learn over time that that's a hot area and they shouldn't get in there. If that seems still a little bit too much, you could try the, things that scare them away, right? So you've heard of the pans and the pie pans that move around and reflectors and streamers, and you can try those things. They're not very foolproof. The deer typically get used to it, and your vegetable garden is a buffet for them, right? So you're growing really good crops for them. They're going to want to get in there. They're not going to let the little pie pan scare them for too long. So really it's a big fence, electric fence is kind of your best bet for deer, which we're kind of having to deal with here at our demonstration garden now, actually, unfortunately.
Yeah, neighbors love the pie pans too, don't they? That's a good sound. Well, one of our biggest pests we have that can actually be a health hazard are fire ants. So Molly, when we're watering these garden areas, fire ants are going to love that moist area. What can we do that's safe for our vegetables for fire ant control?
Yes, you do want to use, if you're going to use a product, you want to make sure that it is specifically for vegetable gardens before you use it. And there are some products out there, such as baits that have the active ingredient spinosad. So there's a couple different products that you can find. You want to follow the label when you're applying them. But it's like a granular material that you're going to broadcast on a sunny day. You want to do it when the ants are actively foraging, and you can broadcast that over the area. And then you don't want to get it wet, so don't do it when it might rain soon. And then you need patience. So it's about, these ants are going to take that material down into the nest. So it's going to take a little bit of time. You might need to have multiple applications, being sure to follow the label, but definitely find something that is labeled for vegetable gardens. So spinosad could be your answer.
That's a great point. You've got to read that label. I mean, it's against the law, so nobody wants to do anything against the law for sure with a pesticide. In addition to ants, probably the biggest issue pest-wise people have in a garden would be weeds. We all deal with them. But Mark, there are some weeds worse than others, and this is probably one of them. Torpedo grass in a garden. I don't know if this was a raised bed or in ground, but is there any hope?
You gave me a how to deal with deer and how to deal with torpedo grass. So appreciate that, Beth. No, if you have torpedo grass in your garden bed, I would basically pick it up and move it somewhere else, quite honestly. We actually had a school garden here in Leon County that had torpedo grass come up through the lawn and into their garden bed. And no, we just picked up those boards and we moved it somewhere else because it was done. We did put a link in here to, the Center for Aquatic Invasive Plants. It's a center out of UF. They study the best way to, take care of invasive species. Torpedo grass is one of our worst invasive species, and they got information there. Torpedo grass is a real kind of booger to deal with. And so again, you might just want to pick it up and start fresh in an area where you don't have torpedo grass and try to then manage that little patch kind of separately.
Yeah, site evaluation is really important. And if you need help with a school garden, that's where Extension can help you identify a good site so you don't build a garden in a weed patch for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Molly, what about something that's a problem on cucumbers is mildew? Are there things that people can do with certain plants, select varieties, or is there a treatment to help combat mildew on cucumbers?
Yeah, the first thing you can do, you can try to look for disease-resistant varieties. So, that can be the first place to start to make sure you have something that can take our humid, hot environment better. And another thing, again, goes back to air circulation. Make sure you have proper spacing between your plants. And then really kind of manage the moisture. So if, of course, it's going to rain, but when you're irrigating your crops, your cucumbers, really try to make sure that you only irrigate the soil. So any moisture that you can keep off of those leaves is going to help, really prevent some of these different foliar type diseases and mildews that can occur. So a lot of cultural practices can go a long way to making sure you have a healthy environment.
That's terrific. We're going to kind of move into a miscellaneous category to finish out our time here. So Molly, we'll come back right to you. We have a last general average frost date, and we've kind of said that was March 15th. Has that changed recently?
So we did change our planting zone. Now we're in zone 9A instead of 8B for most of the Panhandle. So it's these planting zones. They're based on like 30 years of data that they come together, and so they've noticed that the temperatures have gone up about enough to put us into a 5-degree increment into a higher zone. But that does not mean that we're out of the clear as far as having frost that, our zone has put us around mid-March as the last frost date. I know last year we had a frost, I think it was March 19th. So, you really still need to be, even though we're in a higher zone, you need to be aware that we can still get those later frosts and have a plan. So we're going to have hotter weather going forward. And so the quicker you can get your vegetables in the ground, the better. So in case we have one of those late frosts, it is important to have some frost cloth, something that can give your plants protection if you decide to risk it. But it's all based on probability. So, being a little more risky, planting early, just make sure that you have a plan.
So they need to develop a plant that will mature in about 3 weeks and produce beautiful tomatoes. So we can get it done before the heat and not take cold.
I'm sure UF is working on it.
They're working on it right now. Well, Mark, we had an interesting question about potatoes. So I think DeAnthony, you mentioned we're getting ready to start potatoes, but Mark, the person wanted to know, do you chit potatoes?
Yeah, the question was to chit or not to chit, I believe.
That's the question.
So, what is chitting a potato? That's cutting the full seed potato in the smaller sizes. And yes, I would say chit away, right? Because what you want to do is typically you want potatoes, your seed potatoes that you're putting in the ground. The recommendation is about egg size, right? That's what you want that piece to be. And if you got some seed potatoes, you could get 2 or 3 off of there, right? If you cut it, when you get a seed potato, you're looking for the eyes, and you want to cut about egg-sized pieces that have at least one good eye on there. And so that's going to extend how many you can get in the ground, and you'll get more potatoes at the end.
And we're going to harvest potatoes maybe in May, correct?
Yes, you can
No?
start harvesting. You can before the proper time to harvest is after the plant kind of flowers and starts to fade away. But you can start going in there and dig out little new potatoes if you like as well.
Yeah, that's a great school garden project because they get to see the whole process in that
Yeah.
in their school year. Well, Molly, we had some interesting questions about some cool season crops. So what about planting kale, Swiss chard? We mentioned carrots already. Can we still plant those or are we done for the year with kale and Swiss chard?
Yeah, you can get another, if you want to do it soon, but something like Swiss chard and carrots, you could still plant an early spring planting now. Kale, I mean, I would say kale is one of the plants that's sort of a longer season that you're going to be harvesting from that same crop. And so as our daylight starts to increase, we're going to have more of these vegetables going into flowering, or what we call bolting. So that's going to start happening as we get into the warmer weather. So kale, if you want to do it, just do it right now. Otherwise, hold out until the fall.
Well, what about lettuce? Can we do transplants or seeds of those now?
Sure. Yeah, you can do, as we get into our warmer weather, longer days, it's going to be more likely to bolt. There are some varieties that are shorter in length, something like Little Gem, where you can get your lettuce quicker than other varieties. One nice thing about seeding lettuce is it gives you the opportunity to have just a wide variety of types. So look for varieties that have a shorter maturation time, and you can beat the heat that way. And also shade cloth, something like that, you can kind of extend the season. So, especially in that afternoon when it gets really hot, put some 40% shade cloth over your lettuce. You'll be able to extend your season.
Terrific. Well, DeAnthony, I'm going to kind of throw you a different one here. Do you think a homeowner could plant edibles in a flower bed or just as part of their yard? Is there a way to do that?
Most definitely, Beth. One thing that comes to mind is companion planting. So that is the method where you plant different types of plants together that will benefit each other. A great way to do that is planting marigolds in between your vegetables, because not only that you get the beautification of the marigolds with your vegetables, but marigolds are very well known to bring in your good bugs to attack your bag bugs. And so that is a really good example of really combining your landscaping with your edibles. Another way is that is a great way to really incorporate more herbs within your landscaping, because not only do they have beautification, but you can also use them in teas and things of that nature. So there are multiple ways about going about regarding edible landscaping.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to throw this to all of you. What would be your favorite companion plant for the garden? Molly, if you don't mind, we'll start with you.
Oh, that's a tough question.
Just one.
Just one. I guess for a spring garden, I'm going to say basil, just because it's so versatile, in the kitchen, pretty easy to grow, and I've had good luck with it.
And bees love it too, right? If it does go to flower.
Yes.
Okay, Mark, what's your best companion plant you add in?
I'm trying to think here, and I'm thinking of our awesome master gardener volunteers in Leon County. There's the little splinter group. They call themselves the Veg Heads. They're the ones that love working on the vegetable garden, and I really love it. They use buckwheat a lot, and buckwheat's just a cool. It's kind of they use it as like a cover crop slash mix interplanting with other crops, and it's just pretty. It's like a plant you don't see a whole lot of. It's pretty, and it brings in a lot of pollinators. So I like buckwheat. I'll say buckwheat.
Yeah, and DeAnthony, besides those marigolds, do you have another favorite companion plant?
I like sunflowers. You can a great way to plant sunflowers with vegetables or using them as a crawler. So I'm planting peas with your sunflowers because they grow straight up. And then you also get the beautification of that sunflower.
Yeah, and you're going to catch those stink bugs or those leaf-footed bugs Molly mentioned with
Yes,
the sunflower. So you've also trap cropped right there. That's
exactly.
terrific. Well, I think we're finishing up here. We've gotten through the majority of our questions. I think we've hit most everything. I think someone did ask about gardening with salt air, but really, you know, those type things are things you can do where you modify the vegetable garden, maybe in container or raised bed, or where it's not going to be impacted by that salt air as much, things like that. Just a final comment from everyone for the vegetable season, Mark?
Go ahead and try some stuff. You know, go ahead, try a small little batch. Don't bite off more than you could chew. Start with a couple little plants and see what happens when you eat that first little bit out of the garden. It's gonna blow your mind.
All right, Molly?
Have a plan, you know, really try to consider what all you're going to plant in the different areas, and just get ready to do all the work that is involved in spring gardening, because it's going to be hot, and the more that you can be prepared, the better you'll be able to garden.
All right, and DeAnthony, your final thought today.
Have some fun. And I say that because a lot of people view gardening as, oh my gosh, I can't grow anything. But there is always fun in everything, and I think the best fun out of vegetable gardening is you get food when you are done. So always remember to have fun.
We love a reward, that's for sure.
Yes.
And everyone, remember, we appreciate you being here today, but we are always here to help at your local county extension office. Call us with a question, bring in a plant, send us a picture. We will do our best to get you the best information out there. I want to thank our panelists for being here, and also our behind the scenes crew that helped pull all of this event off for us. Don't forget, next month on March 7th, we're going to have a totally different session on growing palms. So a different world in the palm world, but we've got some great expertise on that panel. And also, you're going to get a survey in a couple of days. So please fill that out. That helps us determine what you learned and if you're using our information. So thanks everyone so much, and we will see you next month.
Bye, y'all.